Hello all, this is Coach Red Pill speaking to you. I'm joined by Dr. Benway, and this is the Coach and Benway show. And Dr. Benway, why don't you say a few words to prove that you're real?
I can guarantee with some certitude that I am real.
That's good to know. That's very good to know. Anyway, we're going to be talking about Stanley Kubrick, and we're coming at two very disparate positions on Kubrick's work. Now, both of us have seen all of the work, and we're going to assume that everybody who's listening to this rather, has also watched all of his pictures. So we're not going to go into the plot details unless it's specifically necessary. We're just going to dive in, and Benway thinks that Kubrick was all that and more, better than sliced bread, and I think that Kubrick was overrated, and the closer that I look at him, the less appealing I find him. So let's just dive into it. So Benway, why do you think that Kubrick is so great? Why do you think he's better than sliced bread?
Well, I could go on a rant on this. I'm just going to summarize into three salient points that I think are just worthwhile to discuss. We'll add to them, subtract to them, whatever. So first off, I think Stanley, to me, always had the right subjects. I mean, regardless, okay, take aside the whole craft, the technicalities, all of that jazz. What he decided to make a film about was always interesting, be it from the architecture of an interesting robbery and the killing, to war itself in Paths of Glory and Full Metal Jacket, to the most interesting ghost story arguably ever in The Shining, right up to man himself and his future in 2001. It was always something that was worth seeing, that was different from what other people were doing. That was, even though they were separate, had like a connection of the sense of what is, man and his place in the world. That's always of interest to me. I think second, on the technical side of things, I think he was a technical master. Now I know, I won't step on your shoes too early here, Coach, but I know some of your statements are going to be, hey, he used the same shots all the time. It's like, well, arguably everybody uses similar shots all the time. The reason you know that with Stanley is because he actually used shots that worked and were interesting. To do that. Some shots that were somewhat specific to things that he would do as opposed to things that very few other people would do. So I got to give him credit for that. He even did technical innovations. The only Oscar he ever won in his life was actually for the technical innovation work that was done on 2001. He's also one of the first guys to use the Steadicam. He's the first guys to use NASA lenses in order to shoot live light as opposed to using artificial light to our light scenes. Exactly. And then I think the other thing that should be given a lot of credit, which I think some people don't give him credit, is that I think Stanley Kubrick's arguably the greatest film translator that's ever been there. By that I mean he has adopted a lot of stories to the film, which some people arguably would say either you couldn't film too effectively, like Arthur C. Clarke's The Sentinel, which became 2001, or books which were so really banal and boring, like The Killing, but more importantly, The Shining. Like if you read Stephen King's Shining, it's just my money. It's a dull ghost story with a message: don't drink because you being a drunk is pretty bad to your family. That's stupid. Stanley Kubrick translated it into something more existentially fulfilling about man, his relationship to the family.
Oh man, I so disagree. On both counts, by the way.
I'm gonna punch you in the nose, intellectually speaking, of course, for thinking that. But I think Stanley gave more to those books than they had in and of themselves.
No, okay. First of all, the Stephen King book. Stephen King is not a great writer, insofar as writing is concerned. But The Shining is a high point in his career, and there's a lot going there in the book. But okay, be that as it may. Look, the problem I had, this is my evolution with Kubrick. I started off thinking that he was great. When I was a kid, when I was in my 20s, and even into my early 30s, I thought that he was terrific. And the turning point came for me when I saw Eyes Wide Shut. It came out in 99, shortly after he had passed away. And I was at the time, 31. And I saw the picture. And I walked out of the theater and I thought, that's a colossal piece of shit. I could see how it was a very symmetrical piece, how they had the lead up scenes, and then at the dead center of the picture you had the orgy scene, and then the mirroring of the previous half, mirrored in the last half of him encountering the same characters. I understood the structure right when I walked out of the theater, but here was the key issue that I understood about Eyes Wide Shut. Stanley Kubrick had never been obsessed by a woman, or sexually obsessed if you're gay, but screw that. But let's talk about just basic cisgender, heteronormative, reality. He'd never been sexually obsessed, and you could tell in that picture because he didn't focus on the things that men who become sexually obsessed with a woman would focus on. He focused on the wrong things. And it was clear to me, obvious to me, that he had never had that overwhelming feeling of being in the grip of a sexual obsession. He was trying to write about a sexual obsession. I mean, make a picture about a sexual obsession. Actually, I don't know what he was trying to make the picture about because it was just kind of silly. But to me, he was just noodling. It wasn't. It was just silly. It was a silly picture because I myself.
Well, maybe it'll help me. Maybe it'll help us a little bit. When you say like he was obsessing about the wrong things, maybe if you get a little detail on that, it'd help us get what you're saying a little more.
Okay, like for instance, when he's in a taxi at one point and he's going somewhere, I forget where he's going, it doesn't matter, and he's picturing in his head images of his wife fucking that naval officer. That scene never actually happened. It's not quite that. It doesn't quite work. It doesn't feel organic. Now, of course, the book that Eyes Wide Shut is based on is the Traum novelle by what's his name? Schnitzler, right?
Arthur Schnitzler.
Yeah, which is kind of like a trivial book. I mean, it's forgotten for a good reason. It's a trivial book, and okay, let me start going, back to front, if you will. I started thinking about Kubrick seriously after I saw Eyes Wide Shut because I'd been overwhelmed by the technique of him. And I realized as a young man also, young people especially need structure in their lives. And one of the things about Stanley Kubrick is that he's exceptionally structured, not only in his stories, but in his shots. His shots tend to be very structured, very symmetrical. He always has, the perspective point is usually dead center on the screen, or else he's at a 45-degree angle to the subject. He tends to use the same close-up shots, which is actually a medium close-up with a very shallow depth of field on the lens. And that blurs out the background. Well, you call it blowing it out in film, but, blurring it out. Okay, he blurs out the background. And I remember my favorite shot of those was in Barry Lyndon. But the thing is, see, you start realizing that all of the shots, all of his close-ups are exactly the same. There's no variety. It's always the same. And that kind of structuralism is extremely appealing to young people precisely because they don't have much structure in their lives. They don't have much structure in their lives because they're getting going in their lives. But as you get older and you start acquiring structure that you have built or circumstances have imposed upon you, well, then you start looking at that structuralism. I don't want to confuse it with the actual structuralist movement, but I think you know what I mean.
Yeah.
You start to look at it and you start to find it like kind of silly. And you start to see beyond the structure and start to realize that there's nothing there. All right? There's no substance there. It's all structure. And a structure that's serving no purpose. And there's no insight being given. The images are memorable, sure, but I don't know. I mean, I think there's no question that Stanley Kubrick is a major director. Is he the greatest director ever? No, not even close, because he doesn't talk about people. That's the problem with him.
I think you are completely out to lunch here, man. I gotta say, like, I think you've repeated one of the biggest cliches I think that is given towards Stanley Kubrick.
A cliche is a cliche because it's true.
No, cliche is a cliche because it's not thought; it's pre-digested thought.
Okay, fine. Tell me.
Well, I gotta set you straight, old man.
Okay, go ahead.
Okay, so no, Stanley Kubrick is obsessed with people as such, and they're in how they deal with things. It's just he's not wearing necessarily their emotion on their sleeve very easily. I would actually argue one of the a film that's so obsessed with well, one I think Barry Lyndon, as you said, is a very much like a very human story to me. A man who
Yeah, but that's because of the Thackeray novel, not because of
but
Kubrick.
No, I disagree. I think the fact. Well, first off, Stanley chose to depict this novel, so clearly, the interest of the subject is of interest to Stanley.
No. He chose it because he had all this research material for the Napoleon picture that got shut down. And so he basically decided, okay, what picture do I do now? He spent 3 years doing this Napoleon picture, and I got shut down at the last minute. So how do I use this material, all this time I've used? So he decided to pick on a book that would sort of like fill up all this research that he had done and all this location scouting that he had done and so forth.
No, I think that's too simplistic an answer because it's a different period. Barry Lyndon takes place in the generation before Napoleon.
I know this for a fact because I read about all of the locations that appear in Barry Lyndon were going to be used in the Napoleon picture that never got made.
The locations, yes, but he has to switch all the costumes. He has to switch the topic matter. He has to switch the function and purpose of the story, and he still had to choose William Makepeace Thackeray. I agree with you completely.
You don't know about film production, okay? Finding the location scouting, especially at that time before Google and Google Maps and all that, is incredibly expensive. You have no idea the expense of it. And remember, no costumes had been made for Napoleon, okay? It was cut in pre-production. During pre-production is when you make the costumes. But in pre-production is when you go out and do the location scouting to see if you can actually shoot there for what will be the picture. And you start designing on a directorial level what you're going to do, okay? So you have to understand, at that time, in 1970, what was it, 73 or 74? The expense would have been enormous, okay, to have done all that location shooting. Location scouting, rather. So he recycled that. It was 3 years and a huge investment by Warner Brothers, and he would have had to pay it back, unless something was used for it. Hmm?
Well, first off, he was producing costumes. I have the book on Napoleon. I actually have the photographs of the costumes constructed. So they did exist.
They were test costumes. They weren't the entire cast.
Be that as may, he still had to invest into changing the story in order to work. I don't think you can just dismiss Barry Lyndon as like, oh, I have to make up for Napoleon. That's the impetus of the story. It is not the conclusion. He could have picked any number of other topics.
Okay. Moving on. So I think that Barry Lyndon is one of the most beautiful pictures ever made, and just about every shot in it is like a Gainsborough painting. I think that his use of lenses to be able to use candlelight was really quite brilliant. But aside from that fact, it's just airless. It's not about people. It's about ideas about people.
No, there's so many emotionally charged scenes from when Barry's having his first love with his cousin to when he in exile in Europe, in Germany, basically imprisoned in the army of Prussia to encounter a fellow countryman that he's tasked to spy on, and breaks down and says, "I'm really an Irishman like you." To the challenge Lord Bullington has against him, admitting that you upstart who's trying to be a lord of the English realm, you're nothing but a charlatan and a fraud. To the duels themselves that are in the film, they're emotionally charged scenes. To say that they're cold and indifferent to humanity is to simply refuse to accept what he's doing.
It's Thackeray.
But Stanley Kubrick is filming this. You can't say it belongs to everybody else but you.
No, he's filming it in a way that is completely airless and devoid of any kind of real emotion. Look at the performances. They're like, okay, when Barry Lyndon breaks down in front of the guy with the patch, the Patrick McGee character, right?
Yes.
It's frankly, if I were Patrick McGee, I think that this guy's playing me because the emotions are not there. He's not registering. He did not know how to handle actors. You gotta understand that he didn't know how to handle. He would just shoot and shoot and shoot and shoot, and then later on, he decided that he was going to do this like weird kabuki theater kind of shit, like a no play or something. But he didn't know how to handle actors because I think that the guy was basically autistic. I think bottom line, that was the problem. I think that he was autistic and just didn't like people. Okay, that's why he hid out in Hereford or where the hell the town in England is called, right? But anyway.
Well, no. So this is actually a story, an exchange between Kubrick and Spielberg on the question of actors, which I think is pertinent here because you saying like Stanley was into the kabuki stuff. Well, Stanley, after
actually, sorry,
Stanley
I meant no theater, not kabuki.
Same idea, in terms of the mask and the performance. When Kubrick shows The Shining to Steven Spielberg says, "Yeah, I think Jack Nicholson's performance is a little bit over the top kabuki theater." And then so Stanley says, "Okay, Steven, without thinking, what are your top 5 actors?" And he says like, Cary Grant or Jimmy Stewart, this, that, and the other. He lists off the numbers. He says, "Okay, where was Cary Grant on your list? Do you think Cary Grant's a good actor?" He says, "Yeah, he's up there." He says, "But he's not in your top 5. Cary Grant's in my top 5 actors, and that's why Jack Nicholson's performance is brilliant. It's a style of acting, which is completely legitimate style, an older style that is, exaggerates matters, but it's completely legitimate. It's still human." And I think Jack Nicholson's performance, I agree with Stanley Kubrick, in The Shining is one of the key features that really sells that picture. And part of the reason that's successful is he's going to push the actors to do that. Like, I think Jack was complaining about something and he says, "Well, Jack, you're supposedly the big actor here. Let's see it." And he would push and stress people until they gave him what he wanted.
Yeah, but okay, forget about behind the camera, in front of the camera. When The Shining starts, you're in the Volkswagen with the family and they're driving along. He's insane already. Okay, and if I were the woman, what's her name, the Wendy, and the little boy Danny, I'd run as far away as I could because you could already see that he was insane. And that's the problem because he didn't understand that the novel was about the progression into insanity. And that was the idea. Stanley Kubrick did not understand how people can change. He just did not understand that. He viewed them as static objects. That's what I mean by saying that he was devoid of any kind of humanity, because human beings change and grow or devolve, as the case may be. But it's the constant process of change, and he didn't know how to handle that.
Coach, I got to say, you sound like a woman who says, "I can change my man. Trust me." That's what you sound like when you're making this argument.
What do you mean?
Yes, people. Yeah, so yes, people change, but there are certain elements in which people have characteristics that are revealed. It's more so than their change. Yes, I agree, and that's what makes it a better story. Jack is pissed off at his family. I think it's a different story in Kubrick's version. Kubrick's version, which I actually think I've seen more cases of anecdotally. So admittedly, it's anecdotally. Look, I get, the Stephen King novel. Okay, I'm a good guy, but I drink too much and I do bad things to my family. Give me a fucking break. Stanley Kubrick is like, no, fundamentally realizes in a very strong way, I don't like my family. I don't belong here. This isn't the place for me. It's a movie about finding belonging in any way. And in a twisted way, Jack finds home. Home for Jack Torrance always was the hotel. He always was the caretaker here. That's a different existential story, an interesting story. And arguably, in a way, I would say the movie, in a twisted way, does have a happy-ish ending. The character of the father who does not want to be in this family, he superficially tries to make it work. And that's true for a lot of families, that they have troubles, but we're all pretending like everything's okay, even though an outsider can see it. They just play along with it. And eventually you have this catalyst, namely the hotel, where you have someone finds his true place. He goes to it. Jack is literally absorbed back into the hotel, and his family is also free of him. They leave, they escape. this is a happy ending in my twisted conception of reality. Admittedly, twisted conception.
Yeah. I mean, like Kubrick himself said that the whole idea of ghosts and supernatural reality would actually be a cheerful thought because it means that there actually is an afterlife. Yeah. I understand the point that you're trying to make, and it's a valid point. Okay, but. Okay, let's talk about The Shining real quick. A lot of people argue about like the irreality of the sets. That like there are like these long hallways that are parallel to one another, and there's nothing going on. I noticed that on practically the first time I saw it, or very early when I saw it, because I've seen it multiple times, of course. That the sets of The Shining are unreal, but then you go to 2001, and the set is also unreal. It is physically not possible. If you see the spaceship, the what was the name of the spaceship in 2001? I just saw it the other day, or a couple of weeks ago.
Oh God, it's a good point. I think the Jupiter something. I know it was the Jupiter mission, but I don't know what the spaceship was
anyway,
called.
It doesn't matter. You see Bowman jogging around the space station, right? You presume that gravity is given by centripetal force, right? And and the area is too big. It's too big. The inside is too big to fit in that tiny ship. Okay,
right.
And you see it. You notice it because you see the little pods, when the little spaceships, the pods that go out, right? And you realize
that's a good point. Yeah.
And in most of Kubrick's pictures, I can't make up my mind whether he was deliberately toying with people's perceptions of space, or if he just figured that he could get away with it, because he was just kind of ridiculous. And a lot of times, especially in The Shining, I thought, this is kind of silly, because my own spatial awareness would sort of like, what's he pulling here? Okay, what's the deal here? He did it in The Shining. He did it in 2001. Can you think of any like enclosed space kind of?
Those are the two most obvious cases. I can't think of anything offhand.
Yeah, because those are the only two pictures that appear that take place in very enclosed spaces.
Well, I'll throw one more in, and I wouldn't say that it's necessarily illogical, but it's just a stylized the war room in Dr. Strangelove arguably is that way. Now, you don't know where it's contained in, so you don't know that it's illogical, but it's certainly a space that's absurd.
Yeah, it's absurdly large, and absurdly distant one another. Yeah, and I understand that when they were filming that the surface of the table was actually green baize, like a poker table. And of course, it was black and white. It was shot in black and white. It didn't matter, but it was to give that vibe that they're like playing cards. I thought that was kind of interesting, and it must have been an interesting experience for the actors. But going back to The Shining, I just find the picture I find it stupid and corny. And here's something else. This is a real serious objection that I've had about Stanley Kubrick. And you're gonna shoot me in the head over this one, but I have very good reasons to explain this. Stanley Kubrick did not know how to light a scene. He did not know how to light a scene at all. And bullshit that he was a master at lighting and crap like that. Fuck that. He didn't know how to light a scene. He lit all of his shots like it was a TV studio. Every single one. The only exception being Barry Lyndon, because he was pulling the trick of using the candlelights, right? But look at The Shining. Look at all the shots in The Shining. The even lighting, no shadows whatsoever. Look at Eyes Wide Shut. The even lighting. Sometimes it's sort of like a little bit of penumbra because it's dark or whatever, but it's evenly lit. Everything that he shot, he doesn't know how to use shadow. Compare that to David Fincher. Fincher is a master at using shadow. Master at using shadows and darkness and deep darkness to accentuate the scene, to make it stronger. Okay, Kubrick didn't know. He lit everything like a sitcom set, and it's kind of pathetic. I mean,
well, no, there's a few things in there, and I will disagree with you. I won't necessarily shoot you in the head, but one day you may find a knife in your back. But it was for a good cause. So what you're basically saying is you're basically accusing Stanley Kubrick of not being a German expressionist. Stanley Kubrick was not a German expressionist.
He didn't know how to light. He was
I disagree. Well,
afraid of
he
darkness.
was not. He was not using light and shadow and sort of dark and black. He was using color. You have to think of Stanley Kubrick, needing to use color, and he uses color extraordinarily. So and there's also practical reasons why in the two examples you gave that he actually would have what you would call even lighting. One, they're public places, be it a city or a hotel that would, in the world in which they exist, need that even lighting, that open, clear lighting.
No, I'm talking about like in apartments in Eyes Wide Shut. When he goes to the apartment of the hooker, it looks like a TV set, Shot on better film stock than a sitcom, but it's lit the same.
No, I mostly remember the color. I remember the color of her Christmas tree. Her
I remember the
Christmas
purple
tree.
walls on the set of Friends. It doesn't change anything.
But it's important. No, this is actually important. The sickly nature of her Christmas tree later is reflected in the fact that she's HIV positive.
No. It doesn't matter about that. You're talking about symbolism, but I'm talking about how it's lit. Okay.
Yeah, but that's the visualness of that tree is part of the.
No, that's a visual metaphor. I'm talking about how he lit things, how he would put lighting on his shots. Okay, that's different. I'm not talking about what is contained in the shot. Okay, I'm talking about how he lit them, and he lit them like like a sitcom. That's how he lit them. All of his shots. Look at it. Look at every single thing. In Eyes Wide Shut, in Eyes Wide Shut, the only sequence where he sort of uses shadows is when he is at the costume shop. Okay, not even in the orgy does he use any kind of everything is evenly lit, even in the orgy. Okay. Oh, by the way, there are several versions of the picture where you have like these weird shadow figures standing in front of sex acts being portrayed, and they
censored his movie after.
That was Warner Brothers after he had died. They put that in to not get an NC-17 rating. But if you see the unrated version, you don't see that crap. Anyway, the point I'm trying to make here, okay, is that Stanley Kubrick is said to be this technical master. He's not. Okay. He did not know how to light a scene because he did not know how to use light expressively. Okay, there's more to it. There's a reason that the German expressionists had such a huge impact because they showed how lighting could be used. You look at film noir, okay, and everything after, directors learned how to use light and shadow in ways that were visually interesting. Stanley Kubrick never picked up that lesson, or deliberately decided that he was going to do everything like a sitcom. I mean, in some aspects, in some pictures, of course, it was necessary to light it like that. For instance, the inside of the ship, okay, of the spaceship in 2001. Okay, I'm not arguing that. Okay, I'm arguing that. In more quotidian settings and more quotidian shots, he didn't know how to light, and again, I have to say the repetitiveness of his shots. Compare him to Sidney Lumet. Sidney Lumet was a director, underrated director as far as I'm concerned, who knew that he had to adapt his style to the material, to what he was shooting, what picture he was making. Dog Day Afternoon is neo-realist. Okay, and it's shit. It could have been a fucking Italian movie from the 1940s, for crying out loud, right? Only shot in color and in New York, right? Then you had The Wiz. Then you had Murder on the Orient Express. I mean, it's gorgeous and sumptuous. I'm not talking about the crappy movie that came out recently. I'm talking about the one from, what was it, 74, 78, something like that? It was gorgeous picture, But he knew how to adjust and change and adapt. I think that was a problem with Stanley Kubrick. He could not change or adapt. He was frozen. He was like in amber, okay? And so that's my thinking.
Well, I disagree. Like I said, I think that, everything you described as expressionist could be said of his black and white films. He'd use expressionist lighting there. I would say when he got into color, he realized that he was in a different world, so he had to use color. And there are many scenes in his color films in which color is the primary emotional motivating descriptor. Think about in Hal, when Hal is basically being killed off, it's red inside the room where his memory chips are. In The Shining, when the womb of the hotel is gold, It's and his encounter with the spirits there in a gold room, his encounter with the dead, decrepit woman is in a bright green room. These colors, and even think of Full Metal Jacket when when the middle of the night, it's stark blue. When he's in the jungle fighting not the jungle, there's no jungle scenes, but in the city fighting the one sniper, golden, the golden colors of the flame. He's using different aspects because he doesn't just have light and shadow. He's using the tools of color to his advantage. So I think, my counter argument is that you're underselling the tools that he's using.
Well, I don't know. I want to like him. But the older I get, the more
I want you to like him, Coach. I want you to like him.
Yeah, and I used to. But the thing is, the older I get, the less I respect him. The less, and I tend to start to understand why other people in the Hollywood community, especially directors, didn't think that highly of him. Because I've actually directed a picture, and I've done all these little videos for YouTube. And you start to notice things and do things differently. And just doing the craft itself, you start to realize what's hard and what's easy. And I come to the conclusion that Kubrick was, in a weird way, and this is going to sound bizarre, he was a lazy director. He was a lazy director in the sense that he just repeated his shots. Some of the shots are very memorable. For instance, the shot of Jack Nicholson trying to get out of the freezer. Where the camera is on the ground pointing up at him, and he's like pounding the door and ranting and what have you, doing the crazy Jack stuff, right? That's a memorable shot. There are lots of memorable shots, lots of memorable tracking shots, but there are all these tracking shots that he did, for instance. I've never quite understood why people get a hard on over tracking shots. Okay, it demands a little coordination and good lighting, and you're set. It's not complicated. Okay, you just have to make sure that your actor is not, your actor and your cameraman are in sync insofar as the speed of the shot, right? But it's not that big of a deal. And so I've never quite understood why people in film school and what have you get like such a big hard-on over those tracking shots. But it's like, I don't know.
Well, what's interesting is, and this is perhaps, what I'm hearing in there, you have to realize there's two different things. There's the perspective of the effort taken to make the shot and then the output. I don't frankly care how much effort it takes you to do get the final product. Right. That's something that you as a creator of film will fetishize over or worry about. I'm only concerned about how is it working at the end. Does it do does it give the emotion I want? Does it produce the information I need, the effectiveness? That's all that frankly matters. So I think I wouldn't be surprised, because I'm surprised you said you encountered directors who kind of don't like him. I think if anything, Kubrick historically had better friendly voices in his favor from directors than critics, because critics always seemed to, at the time that his films came out, and it was always the case, like when 2001 comes out, people hate it and eventually like it. When Barry Lyndon comes out, same thing. Shining, Full Metal Jacket, Eyes Wide Shut, all the same. Eventually they discover what's important about it.
I don't know. Look, talking about 2001, for instance, I always thought that the first section, with the apes, was fucking brilliant. It was just really, really brilliant. And yeah, you could argue that, you can see that he's got a matte painting or a rear projection or something like that going on, and that they're just actors in costumes. Yeah, of course you can niggle on the little details, but it is a brilliant picture. No, let me phrase it. The opening sequence, it's a great opening sequence. The end sequence, the Star Child, I think it's self-indulgently, inscrutable. You can come away with anything from that, and I'm not going to argue. Then
I think there's only one interpretation from it, and I've had this fight with people about 2001 where they say, "Oh, it's just whatever your meaning is." No, there's one meaning to it.
Okay,
It's
but
very
hang on,
clear
hang on,
what it
hang on,
means.
hang on. The section because the picture is basically four sections. It's the first section is the Dawn of Man section. Then the second section is the Haywood Floyd section when he's on the moon base, right? The third section is the Jupiter mission and Hal going insane, and the fourth section is the when he
The
goes
slit screen entry into the obelisk. Yeah.
yeah. When he goes into the whole trippy thing, right? By the way, I know that you should drop acid in that section. It's supposed to be just awesome, but I've never gotten around to it. But anyway, my point. The first section, Dawn of Man, great section, and that sequence where the ape discovers what he can do with a bone, and figures out that he can beat the other monkeys, and that's the origin of man. I thought that was brilliant. I thought that was just outstanding. Okay, it was so simple, elegant. It was just, I don't know if it was in the Sentinel or not, but because I've never read the story or the novel 2001. But I thought that was just brilliant in its simplicity and just so elegant. And I was just, hands down, that was, for me, the best section. The Haywood Floyd section, when he's on the moon base, I thought it was just boring and stupid. It just went on and on. I mean, it was like, what? He has he gives this stupid conference that doesn't make any sense. Then he has this meeting with the Russians, right? That doesn't also make any sense. And then he finally goes to the obelisk that they found on the moon. And then there's the noise, the radio emission from the obelisk, right? That's perfectly fine. But and remember the stupid section where he has the call to his daughter on the video cam. It was just like, it reminded me of an episode of or like something out of Disney's Tomorrowland. It was just stupid. Okay, it didn't have anything that came close to the Dawn of Man sequence, and frankly, what it should have been, right, is it should have been more, about what man is now, and okay. And then the third sequence with Hal going insane, I thought that was terrific. It was terrific, although, like I said, spatially it made no sense. And I don't have any problem with it. And then the fourth section was the Stargate section or whatever it's called. And that was cool, But I think, oddly enough, the second section, the Haywood Floyd section, fucked up the picture for me. Because I was like, what is this shit?
To me, no, it didn't, and I think there's a necessity for it. So my take on the film, that Dawn of Man gives you kind of a code to read the rest of the film, which is to say, look, there's a stages of human creation right here. There's a sense of existence. The obelisk comes. That existence is fundamentally transformed. So what is the important thing? Before man arises, it's just an animal afraid of the world. He invents a tool to kill. He is now man. You don't need to know anything else. We're jumping forward to the point when he's going to evolve again. And so all those things that you think are boring are actually the things, even if they are boring,
yes, I
are
understand.
highlighting.
Thematically, I understand.
But that's why it's important. They're showing you why the next evolution is necessary. Because man, even with all of this technology that we're showing as a dull individual, he's reached the end of what he is now. It is time for another transformation. That's why the obelisk is found when it's found in one place.
Okay, so why don't you tell me what you think of the fourth section, the Stargate section?
I like it a lot. I like the...
No, but what do you think is the only interpretation of it? You said that there was like just one interpretation.
It's the next evolution of man.
Yeah.
That's why it's a child.
That was the idea. Of course, it was the next evolutionary step in man, but it didn't show what that evolutionary step was. It just had the floating baby, and that was that.
Because we can't comprehend it. In our current state, we cannot comprehend, just as the apes can't comprehend us.
Okay. I don't know. I mean, I thought that it's like bits and pieces of an almost good movie. That's the thing. See? Look,
Look, I'm giving you a harder time than perhaps you deserve, I guess. But I think the point is here. There's a lot more to it that I think Stanley is often given credit for. I think
yeah,
people
well,
tend to
first of all, I
love
think
his
it's a mistake
visuals.
for you to personalize him so much. You should look at him more dispassionately, because he's just a guy. He's just a director. He's a dead man. He's not your friend. And a lot of times when you look at a friend or somebody that seriously identify with, you cut him slack that you shouldn't. Okay, and this is the case with Kubrick. I mean, like for instance, I look at a Coppola picture. Okay, the big ones, the big four: Godfather One, Conversation, Godfather Two, and Apocalypse Now. And he nailed it, all four of them. Okay, even though Apocalypse Now is a catastrophe of an ending, right? It's still a great picture. Okay, it still has it. Okay, Apocalypse Now compared to 2001. Apocalypse Now, just like 2001, has a bunch of great sequences, and one or two sequences that just don't work. Okay, ditto with 2001, and yet there's something about Apocalypse Now that makes it work better than 2001. It's a greater picture, without question. It's just a superior movie, you know. And Godfather 2 especially, they're far and away. Kubrick never came close to doing either any picture that matches either one of those two pictures, especially Godfather Part 2. I mean, this is a fact. Okay, Godfather Part 2 is it's up there with Tolstoy and Shakespeare. Okay, Kubrick again, like we talked the other time about Mailer, right? That he was trying to write the great American novel. Kubrick, I think he was always trying to make the great movie, but he just never quite delivered. He made really good movies. I think that Clockwork Orange, for instance, was his most entertaining, but he never delivered, on the great movie, you know. That's my thinking. What do you think?
So I take it. So to start with, from what you earlier said, I don't know Stanley Kubrick personally, other than through his films. So I'm only interpreting the films as such.
Right.
What I would say that when you say like, oh, Stanley Kubrick could never made or anything close to Godfather Part 2, I would say to counter that, it's just as equally true that Coppola never made anything close to 2001 or never made anything close to Barry Lyndon. That doesn't necessarily mean that one is lesser than the other. It means that they're different. And fortunately, we live in a world where there doesn't have to be the one master ring to rule them all.
I think that there is. You can say that one piece of work is objectively better than another.
I think you could objectively say that Apocalypse Now is probably a better movie than Full Metal Jacket.
Oh,
that's fair, but I don't think you compare. But I don't think you can say. I don't think you can compare Apocalypse Now to 2001 in that way. No, it's
yeah,
apples and oranges.
But Godfather 2, yes.
No, apples and oranges still.
Oh, okay, fine. Well, okay.
I would compare. You know what? I'll tell you what. I would compare the Godfather movies arguably to Barry Lyndon because they are. They do have a sort of comparativeness in terms of the structure of the man's rising and falling position.
Godfather 1 and 2. Forget about 3. That was crap. But Godfather 1 and 2 in conjunction compared to Barry Lyndon, yeah, it's a superior, far superior. But let's talk about Full Metal Jacket, for instance. Okay?
Let's do.
There's the most spectacular sequence at the beginning, which is the Paris Island sequence. It is just everything about that sequence works. It's just fucking brilliant. And then in the second half, it's actually longer than just a half. It's actually like 2/3 of the picture. When Joker goes to Vietnam, the picture just collapses. The whole thing just falls apart. And it's just stupid. The whole thing about the sniper and sitting around while she's bleeding her guts out, and they're thinking, should we kill her or not? Should we save her? What are we supposed to do? It was just absurd. And then at the end, they're singing the Mickey Mouse Club song while they're shooting people. Yeah, it sounds very clever, but it's superficially clever. It's the cleverness of a 15-year-old. And that's the thing. I think that ultimately Stanley Kubrick is a juvenile director. In a literal sense, he is a director for children, for unformed young men who need structure that Stanley Kubrick provides, and needs that kind of simplistic and apparently clever approach to things. It's that's my thinking about it. Let's talk about Full Metal Jacket. What do you think? Do you think I'm right or wrong in my assessment?
So here's so first I'll find parts to agree with you, and then I'll find parts where I take a different attitude than you do. I will say that yes, superficially at the very least, the first part of that movie is one of the best. Arguably, if there's a short story in film, a short film, it would have been a perfect short film,
Yeah.
absolutely. And I think it has more compelling immediacy in it than the second half, but I don't dismiss the second half so easily as you. And I think they're actually related to each other. Let's think about this. To me, the biggest concept at play in the film that's being worked on is the degree to which a raw person becomes the killing machine and gets what is called the 1,000-yard stare, right? Mm-hmm. The idea that, you've been so shattered or snapped to such a level that you are now just literally a functioning killing machine. Well, arguably the main character, Joker, is the second half of the story is more his story.
Yeah.
The first half is more Gomer Pyle's story.
Well, actually, no. I always thought that Joker was the main character of the whole thing, and that this was a sequence that impacted him. But it's ultimately about Joker.
Well, if you take this movie as a whole, it's about Joker. But in this particular scene, the weight he's an observer more than an active kind of driver. He has a role to play, but it's others around him. You see what happens when someone gets the 1,000-yard stare in that first half. When Gomer Pyle, literally after all the abuse he's taken from people, from his superiors and from his fellow men, and Joker himself, who abuses him as well. And that, we had talked earlier in another podcast about the soap bar scene. He gets that 1,000-yard stare and he snaps and he kills his commander. Joker, what's interesting about Joker and his arc is Joker doesn't know what the fuck he's doing. Even after the conditioning of the training in the Marine Corps, he's still like, I have the duality of man. I got the peace sign, but I'm still a soldier. He doesn't know what the fuck he is. He's floundering. The war itself and that act, the visual, the sniper attacking them, the men going down one by one, and eventually getting to the sniper and him choosing to kill her. He finds his purpose. He gets his 1,000-yard stare, and the comparative story that you can have to this to see what's going on. And I think people will know what it is. Ernst Junger's book, Storm of Steel. Mm-hmm. The idea that the war, man put into a condition of war, is transformed sometimes in a horrific way, but sometimes in a very important way, in a affirming way. And Joker kind of gets that from this. He gets his 1,000-yard stare. So Stanley Kubrick is ambiguous about it, but that whole process, that meanderingness you see, is effectively necessary to communicate Joker's meanderingness, and eventually, the order and purpose comes in at the end. That's why, that the whole thing about the sniper and the beauty of the war situation that's going on, but the horror in it and what it does to Joker, you finally get to see what Joker experienced in the first half in someone else. He got his 1,000-yard stare. That's why I think it's still a worthwhile piece.
Okay, but I mean, you said it yourself that it doesn't compare to Apocalypse Now.
Partly because I'm a big fan of Joseph Conrad, and in addition to all the visualness of Apocalypse Now, the sort of, for lack of a better term, and this isn't meant to be dismissive by any means, that almost dope-induced hysteria of Apocalypse Now combined with psychedelicness. Psychedelia. And by the way, there's a similar writer between the two. Michael Hare wrote the narration in Apocalypse Now, and he wrote Full Metal Jacket. So it's fair enough. I think there's plenty of reasons to compare these two. That is one. There's a stylistic connection between the two. But I think Apocalypse Now, because it has that extra layer of Conrad in it, and because it has an even bigger canvas of things that's going on, I think it does edge it out, but that doesn't entirely, in my mind, dismiss Full Metal Jacket. It just simply says, in a world where there's 2 or 3 really good Vietnam movies, it's 2 or 3. It's still pretty good.
Look. I think that of the truly great Vietnam movie. Okay, let me phrase it. Of the noteworthy Vietnam War movies. Okay, forget about whether they're great or not. There was The Deer Hunter. There was Apocalypse Now. I forget which came out first.
Deer Hunter is 78. Apocalypse Now is 79.
Right. But well, Apocalypse Now started in '75, so well, okay.
Yeah, we forgot about the 50
Yeah.
years to make it.
Yeah. Okay. So Apocalypse Now, Platoon, Full Metal Jacket, and what else?
Arguably, Hello Vietnam kind of is in there, but it's not really the
Oh
war
yeah.
itself.
But yeah, Hello Vietnam. Good Morning Vietnam. Good Morning
Good Morning,
Vietnam.
Vietnam. I'm
Yeah,
sorry.
yeah. That was a surprisingly good picture. Yeah, it's not artistically on the level of any of the previously mentioned pictures. Even Platoon, which is sort of dopey retrospectively. Platoon, oddly enough, is nowhere near as good as Wall Street, which was Oliver Stone's next picture. Wall Street was much, much better picture. Platoon was just
I completely
dopey.
agree with you. I think Platoon is arguably the worst of the Vietnam pictures. Ironically, the one
Yeah.
that gets the Oscar.
Yeah.
Surprise, surprise.
Yeah.
And also arguably one of the worst of Oliver Stone's movies. Like, fuck,
Yeah.
I even like Alexander more than I like Platoon. I gotta be brutally honest with you.
Well, no, I watched Alexander twice to see how it was that Oliver Stone fucked it up so righteously. But anyway, oh, and also there was Born on the 4th of July, which was a very
Yeah,
interesting.
and that's
Yeah.
and arguably, Forrest Gump can be thought of in that same way because it's partly the war and partly after the war. But Born on the 4th of July to me always feels more like it's after the war that it's the thing. It's the home front. Coming Home is arguably another Vietnam
Yeah.
War movie, but again, that's the
Yeah.
home front.
Yeah, yeah. Okay, so about Vietnam combat movies. Okay, I'd have to say Apocalypse Now. Like by a couple of horse lengths, followed by Full Metal Jacket and a horse length behind. Like Deer Hunter and just way back there Platoon. That's basically how I would rank them.
And I'd agree with you on that more or less. I think we're in line there.
Yeah, but okay. The picture that I think the only picture that I fully embrace of Stanley Kubrick's Over is that how you pronounce Over?
Oeuvre.
Oeuvre. I lack JF's French cadence. Oeuvre.
It's also a very pretentious word, so if you don't use it, it's not going to harm you.
Yeah. So anyway, of the overall work of Stanley Kubrick, the one picture that I indisputably adore is Dr. Strangelove. I think that picture just nails it. Everything about it, I think, is good, and I think it's the one picture that I'm like on board across the board. Okay, I can't argue with anything about it. I think that it's incredibly amusing. I think it is deadly serious. I think it was a brilliant move by Kubrick to turn the source material into a comedy, because originally it was like a serious book, okay? And I forget the name of it. Do you recall? It wasn't Fail Safe. It wasn't Fail Safe.
No, that was the other one.
Yeah.
It was the other one. I forgot exactly the title. It really doesn't matter because
because it was so rewritten and turned into a comedy. That was a brilliant decision, because to realize that this is so absurd that you can't take it seriously, that you have to make a joke out of it. And the way it ended, because it ends in the apocalypse, and Vera Lynn is singing "We'll Meet Again." It was just brilliant. I mean, that is, even the beginning of it, with the bombers refueling. It was like these little babies getting suckled by their mother. It was just so amusing.
Or it looked like a cock penetrating a woman, depending on your age and point of view.
Well, no, I always thought of the suckling child, because it was smaller planes hooking up to the big bomber with all the milk, and you know how the Sterling Jack D. Ripper. General Jack D. Ripper would go on and on about his precious
His bodily food.
God, yeah.
I do not avoid women, Mandrake, but I do deny them my essence.
It was just, and Sterling Hayden played it so beautifully, and the thing is, it was in that picture that Kubrick used some of those like medium shots that he would use for the close-ups, the medium close-ups that he would use throughout his career. That's when they started popping up, and it's sort of like they worked very well on that picture, but then he just kept repeating himself. Okay. But anyway, I thought that the humor of it was on the money, and he didn't come up with that material. That was Terry Southern, but he had the wit. Kubrick had the wit to run with that material. Okay, and the fact that he just let Stanley, what's his name, Peter Sellers, do whatever the hell he wanted. Yeah, I think the original script or the original idea was that Peter Sellers was also going to play the pilot of the bomber, but apparently Peter Sellers just couldn't really bring himself to do it, so he faked a broken leg or something like that to get out of the role.
Well, he was already playing 3 other roles. I mean, he's the president, he's Dr. Strangelove himself, and he's the colonel, or the British colonel in SAC Air Base, where Sterling Hayden is doing his thing. So he's like, look, I got 3 roles already. You need me to do a 4th one?
Yeah. Getting Slim Pickens to do it. Jeez, that was brilliant. And, the funny thing is that Slim Pickens thought during the entire shoot that it was a serious movie.
Even when he's writing the bomb down?
Yeah.
Did that give the game away a little bit?
I don't know. I mean, I hope he had the brains to realize it at the time, but yeah.
I mean, that's one of the most beautiful images of all time, frankly.
Yeah.
Slim Pickens writing the bomb down to his ultimate destruction
in
of him and the world.
In total silence. That's the eerie thing about it, because the only thing you hear is him like whooping, but you don't hear anything else.
You hear a little bit of echo from like the fact that he's in this just the open space of the earth making the noise, and that little echo really is the touch that does it for me.
Yeah, but a brilliant use of sound design. No, the picture, that's a home run. That is a great picture. It's not only that I cannot find any flaw in it. I think that every scene adds to the overall work. Okay, there's not a scene that's superfluous. Can you think of a single scene that could be cut of that picture? Because I can't. I mean, like I look at Full Metal Jacket, for instance, and there's that there's that staff meeting at the where Joker goes and he's like talking to his editor at the Marine newspaper, or whatever. That could have been cut. There are lots of scenes in that picture that could have been cut that were just not necessary. Whereas in Dr. Strangelove, I cannot think of a single scene that you could even trim, to tell you the truth. It's just tightly edited. Every scene gets to the point. Every scene is good, strong. It earns it. I think that's a terrific picture. I mean, no qualms about it. And I suspect you think the same.
Yeah, I mean, to your point, whether or not there are anything that could be trimmed, there's nothing I want to trim. There's something in everything.
Yeah. But even if you were like, okay, you got to cut. Okay, what would you cut?
The only thing I can think of is like when, and again, it still has its value, is when people are whispering about Dr. Strangelove. It's like, oh, in the original German, he was mit wirklich Liebe, which I think is just German for strange love. But even like that, you could cut. But honestly, I don't want to cut that.
No, I'm talking about whole scenes.
Yeah, fair enough. Yeah, I agree. No,
like whole scenes. There's nothing to be cut. Okay. I think it's a terrific picture. I think that was a genuine masterpiece. I mean, genuine, yeah, no question. The Lolita, for instance, I don't remember it. I know I saw it.
So to be perfectly honest, that's actually what I would say is the weakest of the Kubrick films for me. Mm-hmm. In part because it feels the most compromised, and I think even in the behind the camera it was. I mean, it's being different from the book is fine, but I mean, changes had to be made to make it less scandalous. So raising Lolita's age, for example, softening the implication of what's going on. It has its moments in it, and Peter Sellers certainly can be funny. But I think it's a little bit lesser than, frankly, even, and this may be sacrilege to Kubrick fans, I actually prefer the Adrian Lyne version of Lolita to Kubrick's version.
Yeah. But I don't like the Adrian Lyne version either, because they used a girl who was clearly like 16 or 17. I mean,
it's the same problem. Yeah. It's the same problem.
Yeah, because nobody has the balls to actually put like a 13-year-old and make the picture there. It's too controversial. Yeah, it'll never get made the way Nabokov wrote the book. Yeah, that's fine. But and Paths of Glory. Well, the interesting thing about Paths of Glory is supposed to be a great anti-war picture, and Yeah, it's a great picture. Well, it's a very, very good picture, though it is very sentimental at the end. And the thing is, see, the picture originally had a happy ending. Kubrick wanted the happy ending because in the picture, it's about these three French soldiers who are randomly picked because, okay, this battalion tries to take a hill that the Germans hold in World War One, and they fail to do so. And the colonel in charge, Colonel Jacks, who's played by Kirk Douglas, he says it's an insane mission, it's suicidal. But he follows orders, the battalion goes up, they get slaughtered, and they retreat back to the trench, right? As expected that they would be slaughtered. But the generals who ordered this insane attack are incensed. And, they basically, I think that they wanted to court-martial everybody or shoot everybody or something like that. But eventually they decided that, okay, they were going to court-martial and execute three randomly chosen soldiers, which is just grossly unfair. And Jax, who used to be a lawyer in the real world, he's assigned the task of being their defendant. And there's a trial, and of course they lose, and the soldiers are executed, as a matter of fact. And Colonel Jax says to the generals that they're just evil men and blah, 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 and, but the men die. They are shot, by a firing squad. And at the end of the picture, there's this scene where all the soldiers there, French soldiers, are laughing it up and bullying this German girl who's like singing a song, and she sings it so sweetly that all the French soldiers, like their hearts melt and they stare at her adoringly, and that's the end of the picture. Paths of Glory has a lot of remarkable battle scenes, and it's really good. That's why you started using the tracking shot. I think that was the first time you used tracking shots. Am I correct?
He might have used one on The Killing, I think, but it's Paths of Glory is more notable or better execution of them.
Yeah, I mean there are a lot of tracking shots. I mean both the ones that the pullbacks where the character is walking towards the camera, but the camera is moving away, so there's a fixed distance between the camera and the actor, and also the lateral and following tracking shot where he follows the soldiers as they go up and try to capture the hill. And the battle sequences are exceptionally well executed and exceptionally well photographed. It's really very good. I mean, that's how you shoot a battle sequence. And the scenes in the trenches are all great and all that. But see, he originally wanted a happy ending, that the soldiers didn't die. And it was Kirk Douglas who said, no, that's why I'm doing this picture, because the soldiers get shot, or else I wouldn't do this picture. I don't want a happy ending. I want it to be like, And it was Kirk Douglas who pushed to have the ending we know now. So, so knowing that, I how can I put it? This uncompromising artist pose shit that attaches to Kubrick's name, I can't buy it. I can't buy it at all. When
Well, to be fair, that was from a period where Stanley was a director for hire. So The Killing is the first movie he's done. He gets that's within the studio system, although it's a B movie, so he can get away with the stuff. Paths of Glory and Spartacus, Kirk Douglas brings him on.
No,
he's a hired gun for Kirk.
It was the other way around, because with James Harris, his co-producer on Paths of Glory, they had developed the property and the script for Paths of Glory, and they presented it to Kirk Douglas. It was Spartacus that he was for hire.
Interesting. Yeah. I thought he was involved.
No. With James Harris, his former producing partner, who was a key person in Kubrick's career, and he doesn't give him enough credit. He was the one who found the book. He was the one who, by the way, who found the book for The Killing and convinced Kubrick to do that. And Paths of Glory, James Harris was the one who found the book and convinced him to do the script, and they shopped it around, and Kirk Douglas wanted to do it. And because of the experience on Paths of Glory, Kirk Douglas hired him to do Spartacus. But on Spartacus, yeah, it wasn't a Kubrick picture. That was just a gun for hire. It was just, doing it for the money. It was another Swords and Sandals epic, and just to up his career, which is perfectly fine. There's nothing wrong with that. Okay, I mean, as far as I'm concerned, if you want to be able to do whatever picture you want to do in the studio system, sometimes you got to bite the bullet and do one for them. Steven Soderbergh has said that he's trying to do a career where he's doing one for the studio and one for himself. There's nothing wrong with that. Okay, and it was going to be a huge paycheck, so he'd be a fool to pass it up. And so anyway, but Paths of Glory, see, to me, to my eyes, it shows that Stanley Kubrick was not this uncompromising artist, okay? Because if he was willing to compromise on something so key to the picture for the sake of popularity, because it wasn't even the studio that was asking this. The studio already knew that it had a bad ending, an unhappy ending, and they'd financed it because Kirk Douglas was going to be in it. And Kirk Douglas was on board because of the downer ending. But Kubrick was concerned about the audience reaction. And that's why he decided that, in pre-production, that he wanted to do the happy ending. I don't know what the happy ending was, but it was Kirk Douglas who said, I'm not going to do it. Because why would I? I could do that with any director. I want to do a downer ending. But that shows how Kubrick, far from being the uncompromising artist, kept his eye on the audience constantly. And that, I suppose, diminishes him in my eyes, or diminishes that reputation he had for being this like aloof artist who does only his vision,
Well, again, I take it a little bit with a grain of salt because it's still an early Kubrick film, right? I mean, it's his second studio film. That reputation that he's gotten really starts in the aftermath of Lolita. It really starts after he's gotten his success in Dr. Strangelove and he can do 2001. Then it's basically his relationship with Warner Brothers is when they just said he does whatever he wants to do at that point. Right. This is a different studio, a different situation. He's a younger guy.
Yeah, I see your point. I see your point. But there is something to be said that he constantly had his eye on the audience. And he would tailor his movies. He cut out big chunks out of The Shining after it was released. Which, by the way...
he was...
go ahead.
Yeah, go ahead.
No, I was.
He constantly tinkered, and you're right. Sometimes it was with the audience in mind, and sometimes even for the home video presentation, he would decide whether or not what film aspect ratio best works for home video. I mean, all that stuff he was always picking over the minutia over.
I don't know. I'm really surprised that after the picture was released, he sent out people to cut out like 16 minutes of the picture of The Shining. That shows I find that pathetic, I mean, when you lock a picture, you lock a picture. You have plenty of time to figure out what you're going to do before you send it out into the world. Okay, so I just don't get it. Editing is the cheapest part of doing a picture, okay? Because it's basically you and the editing studio, and that's it. You can go for a long time editing, and it's marginal cost to the overall production, okay? And so for him to have sent out a picture after picture lock, and it's in the theaters, and he decides to cut out, 16 minutes, I think that's pathetic. I'm like, what? I would just be flummoxed if I was the studio executive. But okay, at the time, insofar as Warner's was concerned, he was untouchable, fine. But yeah.
Remember, this was the man who had the power to pull Clockwork Orange from the English theaters because of perceived threats against his family, and Warner's acquiesced.
Well, yeah, but that was a reasonable request. A lot of people say that, only Kubrick could have asked that. No. Because first of all, it already had its theatrical run. So from Warner's point of view, it was sort of like pointless. Or it had already accrued the bulk of its cash in the UK. So it was a marginal cost, and they realized that they had a long-standing relationship with Kubrick. They didn't want to damage it, sure. But at the same time, even if they had not had such a relationship, the fact that could potentially hurt the director himself would have looked bad to Warner Brothers insofar as the Hollywood community is concerned. So it wasn't so much that Kubrick had enormous power, it's that circumstances aligned that he would get his way easily, okay? I mean, let's not overstate the situation, because if Warner had not done that, in Hollywood, the Hollywood community would have been like, what the hell? You know, this guy's family is under threat because of this picture, and you're not pulling it from that one market. You have the whole rest of the world, and you're not pulling it from that one market. It would have looked bad for Warner Brothers, for the Warner Studio people. So it's not that big of a deal. Okay, I mean, it seems
No, I
so.
see your point.
Yeah,
I see your point. Yeah, you know, it's fair because there's a liability issue that's contributing to that.
yeah, that too. I haven't
But
even gotten into that, but you're absolutely right. But look,
but I would say for the last thing I'll just say about that, to me, that Kubrick continuing to work and tweak on his movies isn't that much of a concern for me. I mean, I live in the sort of world of director's cuts abounding, so the fact that Kubrick feel that he was in a position to continue to work on his films, whatever, so be it.
but I don't know. I go back to my original opinion. I don't feel that that his pictures, really starting with 2001, okay, addressed human concerns. You know, I think he just didn't care about people. He just did not care about people at all. Because 2001, now that I think about it, is the last picture that he made, which was where the characters were vaguely naturalistic, naturally human. I'm talking about the Haywood Floyd situation. Now, the astronauts tended to be a little bit robotic, but real astronauts actually are kind of robotic, and they sort of like have to be, okay, because of the kind of work that they're doing. So that's fine. But like in pictures like Clockwork Orange and all the rest of them after that, what's that? Clockwork Orange, Barry Lyndon especially. That was like no theater. Definitely. And then The Shining, and then Full Metal Jacket, and then Eyes Wide Shut, where everybody's just robotic. It's like
Well, I would say this. So obviously I'm the disagreeing party here.
yeah.
I would say that he has a performance style, and the other director who has performances like this, who when I was younger thought, oh, this is all fake and artificial, but I get what he's going for. David Lynch also has this kind of performances that come about in his pictures. They're not naturalistic. My response to that is always, as I've grown older, is realism is a false goddess that you don't need to suckle on for the rest of your days.
No, I agree. I agree. Look, I love Peter Greenaway pictures, for instance. And Peter Greenaway pictures are far from naturalistic as you can get. They're completely artificial.
For sure. Yeah.
Yeah, completely artificial, and that's cool. I like it. I think it's interesting. And you have Cronenberg pictures. Well, there's an example. Cronenberg pictures. He has that use of actors of denaturing them of their humanity, but it works. You look at Crash, the movie based on the J.G. Ballard novel, and that Cronenberg directed, and it's weird and it works. It's like an eerie kind of Twilight Zone-ish kind of vibe to it that works very well. Then you look at I don't know. Not Eastern Promises. What is it called? The one right before Eastern Promises.
A History of Violence.
History of Violence. Right. Again, that works very well. That kind of like and I love how Cronenberg does action sequences because they seem so bizarre and unique. The way he uses insert shots and close-ups in his action sequences is really remarkable because it is. I think that so far as action sequences are concerned, Cronenberg is doing, his style is unique. He's really doing action stuff in a way that nobody else has ever done. Okay, but anyway, that's besides the point. My point is, see, he uses actors and sometimes denatures them of humanity, makes them so banal that they seem like robots just getting through life. I understand the point there, and it works. But Cronenberg knows when to step off the gas insofar as that direction, and let the humanity of the people blossom. Kubrick doesn't. I think that's the point. Like, for instance, When in Barry Lyndon, what we were talking about at the beginning of this conversation, and when he's talking to the Patrick McGee character and confessing that he is an Irishman and he's been sent to spy on him by, he's a fellow Irishman sent to spy on him by the Prussian government, by the Prussian agents or whatever. Cronenberg, how would Cronenberg have directed that shot, that scene? He would have had Ryan, what's his name? What's the name of the actor?
Ryan O'Neal.
Right. He would have had Ryan O'Neal show more humanity, not be so roboticized, and let the humanity blossom. But Kubrick kept him on point in that no theater approach.
I think I disagree. I think it's just this is a man. I remember that performance distinctly. It's a man on the knife's edge. He's literally about on the edge of breaking into tears throughout the whole thing. He's struggling to maintain his composure like the soldier that he was trained to be. And it wasn't until after he gets his thoughts out that he completely breaks down. And I think that performance works well. And I think the other performance that works well, even though there's no words to it, is Patrick McGee's reaction to it, to just see that this is a man barely holding himself together. I think it works, but maybe it's just a matter of taste.
Well, look, at the end of the, we're neither going to agree, change each other's minds, but I think we could both agree that Dr. Strangelove is the best picture that he ever did.
I won't say it's the best, but I'd say it's very, very strong.
Okay, which would be your best picture?
Barry Lyndon.
Yeah, I would say also Barry Lyndon is up there. Yeah, I think that's superior to the other pictures. Even though thematically, I think that 2001 is really extraordinary. I mean, I appreciate what he's up to. Though I don't think
2001 has the biggest task, or the biggest topic, if you will.
Yeah.
But Barry Lyndon's my favorite. But I don't get me wrong. I don't diss his films lightly. So, and I'm not dissing Dr. Strangelove by any means. I think it's perfectly executes what it wants to execute.
Oh yeah. But it's the picture I think of most fondly when I think of Kubrick. Because it's the one that I thought was just lovely. I thought that Barry Lyndon, the first time I saw it was just so damn boring, right? And so it's unsurprising that it was a flop at the box office. But yeah, repeated viewings, every time you watch it, it becomes more interesting because there's so much detail and every little thing going on, and it's so beautifully shot. But again, it's the problem of the performance, and ultimately, I guess what happens to me is that. I think you said that you consider him an existentialist, right?
Yes.
Yeah, and I come at it from a more humanistic point of view. He's not even existential. I think he's sort of like nihilistic. That's my real feeling about him, And so the nihilism that he displays in Dr. Strangelove, the gleeful nihilism that he displays, is fun. The end of the world, cool. But I suppose that unrelenting nihilism, it's just, I find it juvenile. I think that's my bottom line approach to this.
Except in Shining, when it's optimistic again, because hey, we live after we die. I take the cheap road out. No, yeah, I know. I think if you were to ask Stanley Kubrick, what do you think of the prospects of humanity in the world? Outside of a few exceptions, he probably would be a very bleak kind of guy on that front. I think it's reflected in his films. I also think, however, that there are some legitimately optimistic things in some of his other films. I joke about The Shining, but there's some truth to that. 2001 is absolutely a giant breath of hope for the species as such. I think that's why the Catholic community gave it an award. The 2001 capturing the spirit of humanity. I think that's true. I don't think it was fake.
Did they give one to Clockwork Orange too?
They did not. But what's interesting about that, I would argue that Clockwork Orange. Look, okay, I'm going to a little bit of a tangent.
I was cured.
But the thing is, here's the thing. That is an optimistic story too. So the problem is, in the novel, there is a subsequent chapter to that where Alex does alleviate himself of his destructive impulses. Mm-hmm. The point is that look, compared, and the priest in A Clockwork Orange, the film and the book, makes this point that you can remove the animalistic, energetic drive in Alex that causes his violence, but you kill his humanity when you do that. And it's not an accident that his love of Beethoven gets poisoned with his love of violence too. They're related.
Yeah.
But it's more important that his humanity is maintained, even if we take the risk of his violence. So in some sense, it is optimistic that the humanity won over the conditioning.
Yeah, yeah, I see your point. But overall, I'm wondering if in the long run, well, look, I think that there are always going to be adolescents who fall in love with Kubrick. I think that his structuralism, again, not to confuse it with the movement, but the fact that he is so structured in his shots and in his ideas and how everything is just so insofar as orderliness, I think that that's always going to have a very, very strong appeal to young people. And young people are the ones who pay attention to movies. And so young people will never pay attention to somebody like Sidney Lumet, whom over the years I've come to appreciate more and more. And yet at the time when I was younger, when I was like really watching movies, when I was watching 3, 4, 5 movies a day, I thought, yeah, he's just a journeyman director, no big deal. And retrospectively, I think that he was just brilliant. I think he was, one of the greatest directors of the 20th century. I don't say that lightly, because there's enough of his work. Yeah, some of it is crap. Some of it is brilliant, and everything in between. But that how can I put it? That humanity to him, okay? And I think that that's what I appreciate more as I get older. I mean, I'm 50, right? And so I look at something like Dog Day Afternoon, and I look at the characters portrayed there. And they're scuffling. They don't know what the hell they're doing. They're scared. They don't want to hurt anybody, really. And yet at the same time, they want things that they can't get as they perceive it any other way. It's so human. It's so real in the sense of not like reality, not portraying New York in 1970, whatever, but in a human sense. It's sort of like something that you understand, like when he's trying to get money for his tranny girlfriend's sex change operation, which is just absurd. But yet at the same time, it's such a driving motivation. It's love, basically. And I think that's what I find it so powerful. I'm sorry, what did you say?
I like ending. I think this is ending the conversation on a point of positive agreement is good. I love Sidney Lumet as well. I mean, from the very first film he directed, which was 12 Angry Men, all the way up through most of the later films. To me, that period where he was doing, it's inclusive of Dog Day Afternoon, but also Network and Equus. The Verdict. There's a really strong string of success that he had there. And you're right. He because he came from the theater. Yeah. So his approach is a lot of that, kind of human reading of theater. He actually did a great film version of, was it Longest Day's Journey into Night with Katharine Hepburn in the Eugene O'Neill play? Yeah, he directed that one as well.
I haven't seen it,
of good films. It was pretty decent, pretty sharp. I agree. He is a man who didn't get attention as much from the art house film cineasts that he deserved. But I think it's coming. But he's getting it now.
I don't know about that. I don't know if the fashion is changing his way. But that's interesting, by the way. Kubrick came from a photography background, right?
That's true.
And Sidney Lumet came from a theater background. And it's completely different because in the theater, the image doesn't matter. It's about the emotions. And in photography, it's the image, it's the look. Yeah, maybe that's the problem. Maybe I simply prefer the issue of more humanity and less aesthetic appeal.
I would say our ultimate goal is in theory, it's the ultimate goal is to the emotional core, and you have different strategies. I think Lumet did it through the human action and performance. Kubrick did it through the placement of image and light. And we can argue about the success of each of those strategies, but I think that they are working on the same goal. I tend to like both, but have a slight preference for Stanley, and I think you're the other way around.
Yeah. Okay. So on that note, we're going to call it a podcast. And so I want to thank our audience for paying attention to us. And this is Coach Redpill and my partner,
Dr. Benway.
We are bidding you a fond farewell, and we will see you next time.
Take it easy.